This is called a can. It's from Laos in Southeast Asia, a little country close to Thailand. I like to play this one, first of all, just because it's kick-ass, and also because it's one of the candidates for the first example of digital information in the history of the human species. We don't know exactly how old this design is. It's kind of a perishable thing. It's not like it's made of stone or anything. But it's probably older than the abacus. And it consists of a sequence of similar objects that are either on or off. So these are the first bits, right here. Now, these were traded across, I'm going to keep on sort of scanning here because you're so wide angle. This reminds me sort of designing hidden displays and trying to get the peripheral vision, which you can never do. So these were traded across the Silk Route in ancient times. The Greeks knew about them. The Romans knew about them. The Romans, well, they were Romans, and so they made a giant version that was powered by steam. And it was called the hydraulis, and it was used to provide delicate musical shadings to the gore in the Colosseum. And it was so big that the slave boys they had operating it couldn't quite do it, so they created the system with planks that could be used as levers, and that was the origin of the keyboard. An interesting question to ask is, have computers gotten better or worse since this thing? Okay, and in some ways, they've unquestionably gotten better. For instance, the number of bits. I mean, obviously, many more bits, even, extraordinarily more bits in your phone now than in this. Well, it depends on what you think a bit is, though. Because the interesting thing about acoustic instruments is that we operate them at the very edge of the possible in terms of physics. If you look at the evolution of the human body and our sensory motor capabilities, there's some special instances in which our acuities are right down to the quantum level. In some circumstances, our retinas can respond to a single photon. The degree of acuity between your fingers, if you touch them together, is just extraordinary. And with good musical instruments, we're manipulating reality, we're in touch with reality at such a degree that I believe, well I know, it's beyond the threshold that we can measure in isolation. Now, in order to explain what I mean by that, I want to tell you a story that I like to tell my students about how to understand human perception. What tends to happen is that in a given era, people use the technologies they're most familiar with in that era as metaphors to understand themselves and each other. So a famous example of this is the steam engine turned into Freudian mythology. There were all of these, pressures building up and all of this. And we still sometimes use this metaphor of the steam engine to talk about ourselves. It's not quite gone. Someday we'll realize that we're over-applying computers as we know them today as metaphors about ourselves. So as an example, I think it's very common for people to think of the brain as a sort of a CPU, and then we imagine our brains having these USB plugs in them, and then you plug in an ear, which is a microphone, and you plug in an eye, which is a webcam, and you plug these things in. Now, that metaphor is just plain wrong. It's actually factually mistaken. And let me explain why. The better metaphor at the moment for how the brain works is that the head is a spy submarine. It's a spy submarine that's performing reconnaissance missions on a constant basis, subtle ones, often subconscious ones, performing little experiments to figure out what's out there in the world, or at least to get as close as possible. So for instance, if you take your head and you put it in a device and immobilize it, your visual acuity goes way down. And the reason why is that you're constantly moving your head very subtly. If you just pay attention while you move your head, even the slightest motion that you can barely control, at the edge of your acuity, controlling your head's motion, you'll notice that all the edges of the room are lining up differently, and there's slight differences in textures and light. And your head's always in motion performing these little experiments. It's actively seeking out data, not passively receiving it like a webcam. If you put your head in a device, and then you anesthetize the muscles that move your eyeballs around so that you're just looking straight ahead, very shortly you can't see anything because your vision system is only sensitive to differences. So the world goes away, it becomes gray. A horrible thing. So you're precisely not a webcam plugged into a computer. You're an active spy submarine. Now, and I'm sure someday there'll be a better metaphor still. But it's somehow people who are doing all the right things, which is, accumulating tons of followers and fans and whatever the term is for the given business that they're communicating through, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or whatever. The people who are assiduously building this virtual thing and doing all these things that you're supposed to do to answer your ambitions tend to actually be kind of spinning their wheels in place. Not universally, but I found it to be extraordinarily so. I think you get a bit of an illusion of a lot of benefits, but here I have to say something a little harsh. There's this funny thing that happens where somebody, let's just say somebody has 20,000 followers on one of these, or fans on one of these services. The problem is that value can only be on relative terms. And there's so many other people with similar numbers of followers that it in fact is kind of canceled out. And so there's a way in which, by regimenting yourself into a database-like existence where you have this I am symbol, I have this many followers, I am this, by roboticizing yourself from a cyber point of view, you also put yourself into these categories with all these other people, so you lose relative advantage. You follow that? So but then where the business is a very strange thing. A great many people keep presences on Facebook. It might seem to you like it's everybody, but it isn't. But can I just say one thing? If for some reason if Facebook is working for you, if Twitter is working for you, that's great. I'm not telling you what to do, and you should be sensitive to what works for yourself. And if it's working, that's really good. I'm sure it does in many instances. If you're afraid, if you want to get out of it and you're afraid to, I just want to tell you, I don't think there's that much to be afraid of. I have a book that's a bestseller, and I've never been on any of that stuff. It's like you think you need it because there's this constant oh my God, I'm going to be left behind if I'm not playing this game of collecting all these eyeballs. But the truth is, they'll find you if the stuff is good.